Strike him out.
2 balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. This is one back. Welcome on. Let's
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matthew Moreno. And yes, I have shaved. This became a topic of conversation on our YouTube channel. I did not miraculously grow a mustache. I'd shaved a little bit. Now I've completely shaved. So here we are, Matt. And by the way, December 1st, happy December to you, my friend.
Yeah, that came very quickly. All of a sudden, Thanksgiving was here and navigated the treacherous dinner that scenario presents. And if anybody saw our food draft last week, you know how I lean when it comes to that stuff. But yes, it is December, and now we can forge ahead. Winter meetings are coming up, obviously the holidays, and then a new year, and just like that. Whether it's good or bad news for us, baseball season will be starting again, and we're going to be hitting the ground running, especially obviously with the Dodgers starting early because of the Tokyo series.
Yeah, 32 days since the Dodgers won the World Series, in case you needed a reminder of that. And as far as I can tell, we don't have a confirmed date of when pitchers and catchers report. The best I found were estimates, and so we're about roughly 72 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting. I believe that's like a early to mid-February prediction there. So 32 days since last season ended, only 72 until the next one. I do have to mention a funny story about the Thanksgiving draft. This was a text message thread that we had between you and me and a couple other people, joking about how I picked mashed potatoes and mac and cheese as my top 2 sides, Matt. I ended up at a Thanksgiving dinner that did not have either mashed potatoes or mac and cheese. Mashed potatoes was supposed to be part of the plan. The person whose house we were at, which is a friend, came up like an hour before dinner and was like, "Oh my gosh, I totally forgot I was supposed to do mashed potatoes. Would anybody be mad if there are no mashed potatoes tonight?" And it's not my house. I wasn't hosting. I wasn't going to say anything, but the irony is I got no ham, neither of the 2 sides that I wanted at the top of my list, although I did make apple pie. So I got to at least confirm and guarantee that my number 1 pick was secured at Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, hey, at least you got your number 1 pick. Unfortunately, things do happen, but certainly the irony wasn't lost when you sent that. I had to kind of read it twice to make sure. And I missed it at first. I thought you were just saying there was no mashed potatoes. Then I read it again. And I saw, oh man, like no macaroni and cheese either. Like this is rough. And I saw, is it DC asking or mentioning? Sorry, I'm scrolling. Yes, DC. I did have some nice fettuccine. So thank you for checking in on me with that.
Yeah. It was. I did have some. Like it was like a cornbread casserole. That was delicious. So that might need to be on my list for future years as well. So it was, overall a positive Thanksgiving experience for me. And so, yeah, it's good to be back. Good to be talking baseball. Here's a plan for tonight. We're going to get into a surprising pitching contract that was just agreed to, not involving the Dodgers, but what it could mean for the Dodgers. We're going to talk later on about Tommy Edman and Blake Snell and kind of their contract details that have started to emerge now that it's been a few days since those have become official. And we're also going to make some predictions about the Dodgers. I posted on social media. We're going to have 3 categories: obvious moves we think might happen, some loosely rumored moves we think might actually come through, and then some completely off the board stuff. We got some great submissions, so we'll run through those. We do have a super chat here from Freedom, said, "Unbelievable. I'm hearing Teo went to the Braves." That's bleep. So we'll take that off. I have not seen this. Is this a non-reputable source, Matt? Have you seen anything?
Yeah, that would be my guess. I have not seen anything from here, let me double check.
Yeah, somebody in the chat tell us if we've missed something crazy.
Yeah, no, anybody that I would trust, I have not seen reported. It's all Frankie Montas, which I know we're gonna get into. And I think it's a good reminder. Jeff Passan, I know, retweeted somebody saying, something to the effect of not believing fake journalists or I forget the exact wording, but it was the other day.
I don't know who he could have possibly been talking about.
Yeah, that I wasn't sure either. But in general, I think it's just a reminder that unfortunately there are people that I think want to sort of break news or be the news, and that can at times lead to some misinformation getting out there, disinformation, if you will. And I think I haven't even seen whoever is reporting Teoscar to the Braves. I have not seen anything to that effect. And I imagine it might come up later, but I will apply this same school of thought to some of the Carlos Correa and Dodgers stuff that I saw going around. But I'm sure we'll save that for later.
So good news for you there, Freedom. We appreciate the super chat. Let's get to the move that has been announced. Again, not involving the Dodgers. Frankie Montas, former Dodger, signing with the Mets, a 2-year, $34 million contract pending a physical. Jeff Passan's tweet, Montas, 31, through 150.2 innings with a 4.84 ERA with the Reds and the Brewers last year. He's the first piece of the Mets' new rotation. Montas, not a guy at all connected to the Dodgers, so no surprise the Dodgers weren't in on this. But holy smokes, Matt, 2 years and $34 million. For context, MLB trade rumors had him projected at 2 years and $22 million. The Athletic did not list Frankie Montas in their top 45 free agents available. So the obvious question that came up in a group chat that you and I were in was, what in the world does this mean for Walker Buehler and guys of his ilk, Jack Flaherty, some other guys that the Dodgers may be interested in?
Yeah, I know from a personal standpoint, my first thought went to, oh man, like Walker Buehler's market probably went up, and that was my gut reaction. And then kind of after taking a step back, I sort of thought, well, maybe not necessarily, because as much as, Frankie Montas has had injuries in his past, and he's not necessarily the most durable guy. He is, I think you could argue, at least just because Walker Buehler's, this was his first season back from Tommy John surgery. And it was a struggle for him, and he readily admits that. And we watching him on a day in, day out basis, or at least when he starts, not necessarily, he's not a position player playing every day, but his starts and all that, getting into the playoff, like we understand the value he brings for October, and that's one of the things that I've discussed is, on one hand, I think Walker Buehler, what he did in the playoffs, is going to certainly has him in a better position in terms of free agency than before the postseason started. On the other hand, I and everybody, I'm seeing a lot of regulars. I'm going to sound like a broken record. Like, I don't know how many teams are going to sort of pay basically just for October.
Yeah. The
Mets are one of them that I thought could, just because of Steve Cohen's pockets. The Dodgers are another. And I don't think the Mets signing Frankie Montas rules them out from Walker Buehler by any means. But I'm not sure if, you look at this and you say, oh, Frankie Montas got $34 million. Well, Walker Buehler has done it in the playoffs time and time again. So he's definitely going to get, 2 years 40, 2 years 45. I think you could see something like that more so with Jack Flaherty, who I think, has a little bit more of a better, established kind of regular season type thing, track record. And so, but regardless, at the very least, maybe Buehler doesn't exceed Montas's value, but his, I think, total value contract increased. And I think the same thing for Flaherty as well.
Yeah, Montas is a guy, or I should say this, 2 for 34 is right in the ballpark of where I thought Walker Buehler would land. Yeah. I will be very curious to see whether he does or not, because I think you make the great point, and this is kind of the one thing I've been trying to caution people, as we talked about Walker Buehler in the qualifying offer, for example, is that sometimes like we focus only and exclusively on our own team for the most part. And so when we see a guy like Walker Buehler, it's like, just keep him 20 million, whatever, without being able to zoom out and say, like, how would another team, like what would the value that the Milwaukee Brewers put on a guy like Walker Buehler, or the Tampa Bay Rays, or the Cleveland Guardians? Like, to your point, they're probably not going to want to sign up to a $35 million guaranteed contract for a guy who, depending on who you ask, there's some people on our show at times that would say he's not worth anything close to that. But like for the most of this season, he was not worth anywhere near that. He was good in the postseason. There's some optimism that maybe he's figured something out, but how many people want that risk profile? How many people want the risk profile of the injuries, let alone whether or not he's any good when he's healthy? Also, that maybe you can get him in the World Series when he clearly shines. But when I look at Montas, the thing is, I'm looking like, okay, 4.84 ERA on Fangraphs. And so I'm trying to talk myself into like, okay, he missed all of 2023 through 1 1/3 inning. So injury concerns exist for Frankie Montas, even though he's thrown 144 or more innings in 3 of the last 4. He missed all of 2023, comes back in 2024, and it's 4.84. So I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, well, did he get better as the season went on? Like, are there splits maybe that at the end of the season, he showed something that like teams are buying into? September, 5.55 ERA, August, 3.82, July, 7.71. So it's not that. So I pull up the Savant and I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's some underlying metrics here for Frankie Montas. Dark blue is bad on Baseball Savant. There's a lot of dark blue. 13th percentile hard hit rate, 22nd percentile walk rate, 21st percentile barrel rate, 19th percentile expected ERA. The only number that's above average is velocity, his fastball velocity. So I just look at all of these numbers and I don't know like what you could possibly be talking yourself into. Now, there's smarter people than me out there. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing, but I say all of this because even if you don't believe in Walker Buehler, and even if you're skeptical of everything that we've talked about, like, I'm not sure you like Frankie Montas more than you like Walker Buehler. So I think it is a pretty good comp as far as the floor for Walker Buehler. The question is he going to be at the floor and be in somewhere in that 2 for 35-ish range? Or is Walker Buehler's market now going to start with a 4 if we're talking about 2 years?
Well, first, Jeff, I appreciate you doing all that research. You also could have just sent me a text and I would have said, hey, this is what the eye test tells me. And it would have matched it would have given you all the answers you needed. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to fully disparage Frankie Montas, right? Like, I mean, the reality is, as
with all due respect to Frankie Montas.
The last time we sort of went through this exercise, I know, we finished the show and on social media, you and I were getting some angry tweets about how we were discussing Walker Buehler and Jack Flaherty. And it's not that we view them in a negative light by any means, but there are tiers to players, to pitchers, especially. And like, we need to be able to have, that kind of nuance conversation with these guys. And it is surprising. I mean, look, was it MLB Trade Rumors that you cited had the projections for, like, they do that for arbitration. They do that for free agency. Like, and they're typically spot on, or, very close to with these things. I think with Frankie Montas, like, signing for what he did, it does, raise the floor for pitchers. And it's what I also start to sort of wonder is, should the Dodgers have just extended the qualifying offer to Walker Buehler? And yes, hindsight is 2020 a little bit. I will say at the time, short of Andrew Friedman has not discussed it. I don't know if he would reveal the reason why or not.
Yeah.
We don't know what the Dodgers' motive was. If it was financial, I sort of disagree, because I just look, it's 1 year. Like, what best case scenario, what were you were hoping to maybe sign Walker Buehler for 17 to 18 per year? Yeah. Just give him the 22, 20, whatever it is at that point, in my opinion. Yeah. If it was, they talked to him, they thought, okay, like, we won't do this. We won't slap this qualifying offer on you, because it would have significantly impacted his free agency market if he declined it, having the draft pick, adding on to all the other question marks with him. Then, okay, I can respect that. But if it was a financial thing, I wouldn't have necessarily agreed with it at the time, and I definitely don't really agree with it now, because it's hard to argue that his price hasn't sort of gone up a little bit, even if, like you said, it doesn't exceed what Frankie Montas signed. But at the very least, we're probably looking at a different contract for Buehler now.
Yeah, I think you make a great point that there's no point in speculating as to why the Dodgers did not give him the qualifying offer. I've argued I don't think that he's going to be living in that AAV market. I'm totally open to the idea that, hey, Jeff, if you think he's worth $16 million a year and you can get him for 1 year at 21 or whatever the number was, then maybe just do it. Totally, like, sure, fine. But it's also possible that, much like Clayton Kershaw, they didn't give it to him out of respect for Walker Buehler, so that the qualifying offer wasn't attached. And so we'll never know that type of thing, but it will be interesting to see. Like, again, Snell outperformed expectations when it came to his contract. Now Frankie Montas has outperformed expectations compared to what people thought he was going to be getting. So whether or not this is a theme for baseball around the league and pitchers around the league, or is it possible that some guys are jumping on the money early and that money's going to dry up as time goes on? I mean, these are the things that make it fun to follow along. So we'll see what Frankie Montas money means for Walker Buehler, for Jack Flaherty, for Max Fried, for all these guys left on the market. But it's at least an interesting data point. We're collecting data points now. And we've even talked about it on this show. Like, I made the mistake of looking at last year and saying, like, the money's not going to be there this year. Like, if you look back to last year, guys underperformed expectations. But now you look at some of the industry experts saying, well, think about how many teams last year had no idea what their TV situation was going to be, because all of the kind of local, regional sports networks that were flaming out. And so teams weren't spending. Well, guess what? Pretty much all those scenarios have been tightened up and locked up, and there's now predictability and stability. And so maybe there are more teams that can jump in and spend some money this year than there was a year ago. It'll just be an interesting data point to follow along. A couple more super chats here. Not Jeff Spiegel says, dollar for dollar, Ha-Sung Kim is greater than Willie Adames change my mind. Matt, do you care to change this person's mind? Compare, and again, dollar for dollar. Not I interpret that dollar for dollar means if Ha-Seong Kim's getting 12 million and Adames is getting 25, I would rather pay 12 for Ha-Seong Kim. I don't think this person is saying Kim is just a better player, but for the money, Ha-Seong Kim or Willy Adames, do you agree that Kim would be a better fit than Willy Adames?
Not necessarily a better fit, but I think put this way in terms of value, yes, I am inclined to agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we know the shoulder stuff that he's coming off. And again, I apologize for anybody who was on with us about a week ago when I messed up Ha-Seong Kim's age. There is another player coming over from Korea whose name I believe is like 3 letters different. And apparently a quick age search gave me the wrong person. So apologies. That's on me. But yeah, like Ha-Seong Kim 12 months ago was a guy that I liked as a potential fit for the Dodgers, not ever believing the Padres would trade him. He had a down year. He ends up having shoulder surgery. Who knows how that's going to impact him moving forward. But as far as his track record prior to that, I think he's a good fit. Willy Adames hasn't been my cup of tea necessarily. And so I agree. I just wouldn't want to be paying the dollar number. Adames as a player is fine, but 6 years, 150 million or whatever some of these projections have is not the type of business I'd be wanting to get into. Freedom is back with another super chat. Says Jeff, looks like you and me both collect bobbleheads. I have a Vin Scully, Maury Wills, and Fernando all signed out of 50 bobbleheads collection. Most of the collection are Hall of Famers. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's great. The good news is, as a Dodgers fan who's been collecting bobbleheads for 15 to 20 years, there's a number of Hall of Famers that are going to be in that collection by the time this one's all said and done. Clayton Kershaw, Freddie Freeman, Vin Scully, of course, Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani. So we've got some Hall of Famers up there. But yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you got some bobbleheads back behind you. Have I asked you, Matt, which one your favorite bobblehead is?
You have. I don't necessarily have a favorite.
Okay.
When you asked me, it might have been maybe about a year ago, year and a half, maybe about a year ago.
Okay.
At the time, I might have said. Actually, no, maybe it was more recent because the Matt Kemp one, maybe it was earlier this year because they gave out the Matt Kemp one where his bat is extended, and I likened it to one of his big hits off of Archie Bradley that one weekend when the Dodgers were coming back to win the division against the Diamondbacks. So maybe that one. Let me see. You can't see. I have to sit at this angle. I'm blocking it with my head. I have like a shelf that is just Kershaw here. If I move, you see it. Like those are Kershaw and some World Series stuff up there, and autographed Kershaw. I mean, I'll cheat. I'll say probably the autographed Kershaw baseball is my favorite thing out of bobbleheads.
There you go. Yeah, I've got a Kershaw batting bobblehead, which is a pretty funny one. I don't know how many years ago they made that, but it's cool. It's cool. So we appreciate the super chat, Freedom. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone joining us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. We appreciate you joining us on a Sunday night. Let's get into a fun little exercise here, Matt. It's one that I pitched to you and I posted on social media. We got some good feedback on, and people who are in the chat live, please go ahead and join this with us. It's kind of an exercise in two things. One is predicting maybe where the Dodgers go from here. We know they've extended Tommy Edman, which in your mind may or may not impact their desire and desperation to add a shortstop at some point. Maybe. They've definitely signed Blake Snell, and that may or may not impact their desire in your mind to go and add more starting pitching or not. So I gave people 3 categories, and I said, give me feedback on these 3 things, which were, what is one obvious move that you think the Dodgers are going to make? And the obvious move would be something like the example I gave was Teoscar Hernandez, who I think most people would say the odds-on outcome here is that Teoscar Hernandez is a Dodger. So what's something like that? It could be Teoscar, could be something else, but what's an obvious move that you think happens? The second is, what's a rumored move that's a maybe, a loosely rumored move that you think the Dodgers might actually follow through on, and we might begin the season with that having happened. And last is, throw me something crazy. What's the out of nowhere off the beaten path kind of scenario here that you think the Dodgers might actually go down? So Matt, let's start with the obvious moves, because I think this is the most straightforward category. And again, people in the comments, go ahead and throw some of your obvious ones here. And real quick, we've got a super chat here from JJ. When is Snell's press conference? Do we know anything on Snell's press conference, Matt?
We haven't heard. I would imagine this week, since they did make the signing official on Saturday. I guess it would also matter. It would, in terms of getting Snell down. Not that it's a long flight from Seattle. I know he was in Oregon over the weekend, but from the Pacific Northwest.
Not having a good day. Not having a good day as his Huskies got whooped by my Ducks.
I would imagine that it's probably going to be soon.
Okay, soon is the answer. Yeah, that was funny. I do want to give a small shout out, a small humble brag and a small shout out. It was actually Steven Nelson. Steven and Nelson and I, part of the things we connected over is that Steven Nelson was in Eugene, where the University of Oregon is, working for a sports broadcasting network kind of early on. And so he texted me and he said, I don't know if you've seen Blake Snell's video, but his Welcome to the Dodgers video was being recorded of him inside of the Ducks football stadium, because Blake Snell, sadly, this is the biggest downside that he has. It's a large downside. I'm willing to look over it, is that he's a Husky, and the Huskies came to Eugene, got their butts kicked yesterday. So good on him. I also got a picture of him in the background of, there's an incredible catch made by a Husky, and Blake Snell's just making a crazy face in the background. So we've got that going for him. But shout out to Blake Snell for being in the great state of Oregon yesterday. So, okay, predicting the rest of the offseason. The obvious moves, and I've seen some people mentioning this one already. Teoscar Hernandez is the overwhelming favorite here. We had one person say Blake Trinen coming back would be the obvious move they expect, and another person said Kershaw, which Kershaw almost doesn't feel like it belongs in this category, because there's obvious and then there's Clayton Kershaw to the Dodgers, which is like, everybody said it's going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. So let's go in reverse order. Kershaw to the Dodgers. 99%? Like, where are we at on this one in your mind? 98%? 95%? What are the odds Clayton Kershaw is back with the Dodgers?
No, that's like 100%. I mean, he in multiple interviews has said he's coming back. He's going to finish his career with the Dodgers. In one specific interview, when he was discussing that, he said, I know I don't have much leverage in saying that, but basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically he didn't care about that anymore. He said, it is what it is. This is where he wants to finish his career. So, I mean, I guess, let me backtrack. It's either Kershaw returns or he, for whatever reason, decides to retire, which I'm not anticipating. We haven't heard anything about his surgery. He shared, like, when he did have his surgeries, that he was going to crush rehab. So short of like something crazy and unfortunate happening during that process, like, he's coming back.
Okay, let's go with the second one here, and then we'll get to Teoscar. Blake Trinen. This is, interestingly enough, Matt, a move I have not heard anybody talking about. I don't know if that's because it's sort of assumed. I don't know if it's just because the relievers market is going to develop more slowly. What's your take on whether or not Blake Trinen is going to be a Dodger again next year?
I think it's a little bit of both of the reasons you outlined. One, I think that is the favorite outcome. Two, I think, in general, like, look at like Tanner Scott, right? Like, he's a huge name that's still available, and there hasn't really been anything mentioned about him, at least not that I've necessarily seen. So yes, I think it's just that relievers haven't necessarily moved. They probably, unless one does kind of somewhat unexpectedly, like, that market probably won't start to shift and see some activity there until maybe definitely Juan Soto and some of the remaining intriguing / top starting pitchers available. That being said, I think Trinen coming back is about 80-85%.
Okay. Well, the last one on this is Teoscar Hernandez, which this would have been my choice for the obvious move. And I have no sourcing on this. I just feel like I have, as I've developed the skill over years and years of listening to beat reporters answer questions about different people. And when I listen to a guy like Fabian Ardaya come on our show and talk about Teoscar Hernandez, and I think back to what he was saying to me about Blake Snell, basically 48 hours before Blake Snell officially signed with the Dodgers, it felt like one of those, the way a beat reporter would answer a question about a guy that is pretty much guaranteed to be coming back to a team, but it's not official yet, so he can't come out and say it. And I'm not trying to put Fabian in a bad spot. He's not the only one. But when I listen to everybody in baseball that even references Teoscar Hernandez and the Dodgers, it just feels like it's only a matter of time. So of the obvious moves, not counting Kershaw, because Kershaw is guaranteed, more than obvious, Teoscar to me feels like 85 to 90% chance that Teoscar is back in the Dodgers, in my estimation.
Yeah, I'll go 90 here. Okay. And I think the only way that he is not back is if Juan Soto, sort of shocks the world, I guess. And I say it that way from the standpoint of, I don't know if the Dodgers would, and I mean, maybe I shouldn't even think this, but I don't know if the Dodgers would give him the kind of believed, long-term mega contract that he's kind of looking for. Now, if for whatever reason he says, yeah, sign me up for 5 years, 500 million or something crazy,
300 million,
ridiculous AAV, then okay. I don't see that, and I don't see Juan Soto deferring the money the way some of these other players have. Certainly not the way Shohei Ohtani is. Certainly a unique case in every sense of the word. So that's why Teoscar to me is 90%, just because the only way I don't see him back is if Juan Soto decides to sign with the Dodgers.
JJ with another super chat. How about Kike back to the Dodgers? That would probably qualify as sort of an obvious move. Do you think? I mean, does Kike belong in this conversation?
He does, but I would have him maybe like 75% back with the Dodgers, just because, I mean, they re-signed him for the 2024 season, but it got a little like he was on the market for a while. It looked like he might even be going elsewhere, and it took, I'm pretty sure Kike is who shared this, basically calling Andrew Friedman like as spring training was about to start and saying, hey, like, I want to sign, I need to sign, I have these offers, like, what's going on? And then, the Dodgers were able to figure out things with Manny Margot to get, to clear up the roster space for Kike, which controversial within some of our staff at the time as to why they would get rid of Margot for Kike. But yeah, so again, I mean, Kike to me, he does sort of fall into the Walker Buehler bucket that we were discussing earlier, whereas, I mean, look, Kike's production, like, he had an uneven regular season. He would admit that. His production did improve after he started wearing glasses and they figured out, he has the astigmatism and all that. So on one hand, if he can convince a team that he has corrected his issues and he'll be better at the plate, great. On the other hand, historically, he has been a playoff performer rather than somebody who you can really count on for consistency throughout the regular season. And it's not a knock on him because, look, everybody wants to be great throughout the course of the year. But ultimately, if you gave me a choice of saying, hey, like, this player could be, a little inconsistent throughout the regular season, but turned it on come October, like, especially for a team like the Dodgers, which option are you going to take?
Yeah.
So with that, like, it is a team going to come and give Kike maybe kind of, I use big money kind of generally loosely.
Relative to what he got last year.
Right. To pry him away from the Dodgers. Like, I don't necessarily know. All that being said, they did extend Tommy Edman. They do have Chris Taylor, like kind of that utility spot is sort of, filled up right now. And so I could see maybe something kind of funky happening there, but I do think that still at the end of the day, Kike is about 75%.
Yeah. I mean, I think Kike knows from a year ago that his market might not be outside of Los Angeles, what he wishes and hopes it would. And when you look in the last 6 seasons for Kike Hernandez, he has had exactly one where he was an above average offensive player, according to weighted runs created plus. 100 is league average. He exactly one in which he was higher than 87. So at his second best season in the last 6 years, he was 14% below average offensively, according to weighted runs created plus. The Dodgers value him probably more than everybody else, but he's not an everyday guy. He's a guy that you keep around and get into the postseason, and then you've kind of have that player that you just sort of stash on the bath kind of moving forward. So I think that's the point. Hallelujah brings up a great point. She said Kike wants at bats, which is why he left after 2020. I would say Hallelujah. Matt, you can tell me if you agree. Like, I think he wants at bats. I think after 2023, he found out there weren't teams out there that wanted to give him those at bats. And so maybe he has left Los Angeles, come back to Los Angeles, went to the free agent market and realized that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And maybe LA is actually the best fit for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think certainly after the 2020 season, he wanted that everyday role to be able to start, and he got it with he got the money, he got the role with the Red Sox. He's at a different point in his career now. He's older, and that obviously, unfortunately, hurts players in professional sports compared to helping them. But yes, I don't think if Kike leaves the Dodgers in free agency this offseason that it's going to be because some team, promised him the I was going to say Brewers. I don't know why they kind of fringe team sort of comes to mind, but a team similar to that says, hey, come play for us every day. And he's going to say, okay, sure, I'm going to give up a chance on, winning another World Series with the Dodgers. And look, we have the video up from Raising Cane's, and I get sometimes these players sort of get swept up in the moment, but Kike has been pretty open multiple times about saying he wants to be back. This is where he wants to play. And so I do think that his first priority, like it was for the 2024 season, is returning. And that's why, I think he did call Andrew Friedman right before, as he was ready to sign with whatever team, like just to see what was going to happen, because I think he does want to be here.
Yeah, I would have Kike much higher in the confidence rankings than what you said. Like I would have Kershaw 1, Teoscar 2, Kike 3. Actually, no, let me go back. I would have Kershaw 1. I'd have Kike 2. As far as moves I'm most confident will happen. I just think we've been down this road a year ago. I think he makes sense for the Dodgers. They value what he brings more than anybody else. So I think Kike would be 2. I think Teoscar would be 3, and Blake Trinen would be 4. Not in order of like moves I would like to see them make, but just moves I am most confident that the Dodgers would end up making. So that's the obvious category. Let's move on to a little more fun stuff here. And let's talk about the loosely rumored moves that the Dodgers have. And do you have like of the loosely rumored moves? I've got 1, 2, 3. I've got 8 that were suggested on social media. I'm curious, do you have a move in mind that of the loosely rumored sort of 50-50 type moves that the Dodgers have been connected to, is there one that you like the most?
Not necessarily. Can I answer it from the standpoint of one that I think is most likely to happen?
What do you think is most likely to happen of the stuff that is kind of rumored 50-50-ish?
I think a Crochet trade.
Okay.
I think they have spent big on starting pitching already, and every report heading into the offseason, since the offseason and free agency has started, has been that the Dodgers were looking for 2, pretty established starting pitchers. And so I think something like Crochet, where at that point, we've discussed it, like they have a 40-man roster kind of logjam, and these players are coming up. You're going to have to figure out something to do with them, and so I think the Dodgers will look at that as an opportunity to trade some guys, clear up that logjam, get another established major league pitcher who's under team control at a reasonable rate, at least for the time being.
Yeah. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Laura. Apologies for missing your super chat. She said Snell is excited to be a Dodger. I love it. He is. Again, that video was awesome. It's just fun to have a guy that, to Laura's point, is not here just because I'm sure the money helps, but I'm sure he wants to win. He wants to be in LA. He's been other places. I can't imagine being in San Francisco last year was a ton of fun. And so I imagine getting the financial security that he's been hoping for, and also getting to do it in an organization like the Dodgers is definitely will make him a happy man for sure. So you mentioned Crochet. Let me give you some of the loosely rumored moves that got mentioned to me on social media. Roki Sasaki is one of these. I think he fits into this category of, some people might say that's in the obvious one, but I think there's been enough skepticism that's been put into that conversation that it feels like 50-50 might be fair. The Crochet trade that you mentioned, somebody mentioned Tanner Scott signing with the Dodgers. Corey said that on social media. A Nolan Arenado trade, which was mentioned a few times. Kenley Jansen coming back to the Dodgers, trading for Ryan Helsley, trading for Bo Bichette. And then one that I thought was interesting, and it's probably what I would say if this fits. It's not technically the Dodgers making a move, but Christopher Atkinson and Kevin both said Mookie Betts being the starting shortstop for the Dodgers on opening day with Gavin Lux at second base was Christopher's addition. So Mookie and Gavin Lux being the up the middle infield for the Dodgers. I understand all of the reasons why, and I'm not even going to sit here and make the case for why I think they should do this or whatever. I just think, what is it, Occam's razor? Sometimes the simplest explanation is the best explanation. Like the number of things that would have to happen for them not to do this, it feels way more complicated. Could they trade Gavin Lux? Yes. Could they put Tommy Edman at shortstop and, I don't know, somebody else, James Outman or Andy Pages or somebody else in center field? Of course they could. But it just feels to me like the simplest explanation is that the trade doesn't materialize and Mookie Betts gets a few more months of prepping to be a shortstop. And that's maybe the outcome that we get to.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't fully shock me. I've expressed why I don't necessarily think it makes sense from the standpoint of the Dodgers when they were going to move Mookie to the infield.
We might have lost Matt. Testing 1, 2, 3. We just
last season.
Maybe
I can hear you. Okay, that was
there. We
that
go.
Was strange.
Hey, you're
Sorry.
back.
Okay, that was weird. I was on and you were gone, and then we were both gone, and now we're both back. So
here we go.
Yeah, our apologies if you're watching this live and listening after the fact. Yeah, I think I could see it. I don't necessarily think it makes the most sense from the standpoint of trying to preserve Mookie's long-term health.
Yeah.
But if they need to do it for a year, if they need to do it just to start the season that way, then sure. I do think that trading Gavin Lux is challenging for the stand. Like, he's not going to be a centerpiece in anything, I don't think, because he did have an up and down season. There are some questions about, his kind of his level of production that you're going to get from him.
Yeah.
So would you be selling kind of short on the dollar? Like, that's not something that the Dodgers typically do. And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, it's almost easier if you re-sign Teoscar Hernandez, you play Mookie at shortstop, keep Gavin Lux at second base, Tommy Edman is your center fielder. Teoscar has said right field is his preferred position, but the Dodgers seem to prefer like Pages there instead of Teoscar, which I think is a little interesting. So however that shakes out, either Teoscar or Andy Pages, they're your corner outfielders one way or another.
Yeah, the Pages and right is simply, I imagine, because he has a cannon for an arm. Teoscar did throw a guy out, Giancarlo Stanton, at home plate, which means two things. One, he did throw a guy out, and two is it was Giancarlo Stanton that he threw out at home. And so those two things, it's like, I don't know which one of those it holds more weight in having that conversation. But of these other ones, I mean, Roki Sasaki is obviously an interesting one to keep an eye on. And I just am firmly in the camp of like, we don't really know anything right now, and we're not going to know anything for a few more weeks. Ben Badler over at Baseball America has indicated that he's got a story that's going to be coming out on Monday if you're watching this live to talk about that. So that might be something to keep your eyes on to see what he has to say. He's usually pretty plugged in on the international free agency market. But I'm curious of these other ones. I'll just run through these and you tell me if you would. I'm not making a prediction here, but interested or not interested. Tanner Scott, knowing the money that it might cost to go get a high-end lefty reliever, would you be interested in Tanner Scott?
Not really. Not at the cost that I assume it's going to be.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious what they have projected cost. Nolan Arenado trade. I think I know the answer to that one.
I mean, 3 years ago.
Yeah. I don't. I mean, I understand kind of like why people are talking about the Nolan Arenado trade. But man, I like the name. The name makes sense and all that. But again, the simplest explanation for how you make all these pieces fit and make the money fit, and is he even a good defensive player anymore, remains to be seen. Tanner Scott, by the way, 4 years, $60 million is what the Athletic had projected for him. So I'm with you. Not that interested in Nolan Arenado for sure. You mentioned Crochet as a trade for sure. Kenley Jansen, you want a Kenley Jansen reunion?
Hey, I mean, I've said it before. Joe Kelly and Daniel Hudson are both free agents. Hudson obviously retired, so Joe Kelly's a free agent. You need to maybe fill that veteran role with a right-hander somehow. So if Kenley wants to come back, then let's do it.
The Dodgers do not want guys who have no options. I don't think they're interested in signing guys that they're going to have to decide, do we keep this guy on or cut him? With all due respect to Kenley Jansen. Mookie at shortstop, we talked about. Ryan Helsley, elite reliever from the Cardinals. Trading for these guys, then you're not paying the financial cost, although you are paying the prospect cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think if something like that happens, it would be maybe part of a Arenado trade, maybe if the Dodgers are going to swing that. But I do think that if they were to go down the path of an Arenado trade, that they would want the Cardinals to probably eat some of that money, which if the Cardinals are doing that, you're probably not getting Helsley as well. So potentially open to it, just don't see it likely.
Yeah, he's in the final year of arbitration there. And the last one was Bo Bichette. He's a guy I liked a lot. Obviously, they have Tommy Edman locked down, but Tommy Edman does not necessarily have to be the answer at shortstop. He could be the answer in center field for the next 4 or 5 years. So I've long been on this. Like, I would rather trade for Bo Bichette, I think, than Garrett Crochet would be my perspective. I have lots of questions about Garrett Crochet. I know he's a pitcher. There might be more value in that. I know his stuff. I know all that. I also know he wasn't going to pitch in the postseason unless he got a contract extension. I also know that he makes Tyler Glasnow look like an Iron Man as far as how many innings he's pitched. And that goes back to Crochet's days in high school and college even. So if I was going to make a big swing at somebody, I would prefer it to be Bo Bichette, although I don't expect Toronto to necessarily be sellers.
Yeah, I'm Bo Bichette. Some of the injury stuff worries me there. I mean, he hurt his calf. I'm pretty sure it was calf like 2 or 3 times this year, and so like on one hand, it was at least the same injury over and over and not necessarily something different each time. On the other hand, so is it just a case of, hey, like the offseason, he can rest and fully get healthy? Perhaps. I think I'm seeing it also in the chat, like some defensive questions with Bichette exist. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
The cost would
I
be high.
wouldn't be.
The cost would be high.
Yeah, just don't know if it would be worth it.
Tim says, after all free agents are signed and trades are made, what is the Dodgers team payroll going into next season? And is it the highest in MLB? I do have this number for you. Currently, after the Blake Snell move, and I believe this may or may not include Tommy Edman, so I apologize. But after Blake Snell, they were at $304 million. That was their tax payroll for 2025. And they're not done yet. So yes, that already is the highest number in Major League Baseball, and it is only going to get higher from here. So to answer your question, I mean, if Teoscar Hernandez, like we're talking about Clayton Kershaw, Teoscar Hernandez, maybe Kike Hernandez, who's like $5 million, maybe Walker Buehler, a pitcher in that 15 to 20 million range. You add all those numbers up, you're Trinen. I mean, you're talking about another 65-ish, maybe $70 million that's going to be tacked on here. So that would put them at 375 million as the tax number. And yeah, I would imagine that's going to be highest. So good question, Tim. And there's your answer. So, all right, let's get to the last category here, Matt. This one's the most fun, which is just totally off the map. Crazy idea. I want to give you credit because you were the first person I heard say that maybe Chris Taylor gets traded on this show. I believe it was maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. And that has now become just like part of the dialogue out since Tommy Edman has signed is when is Chris Taylor going to get traded? So I think you've already sort of stamped your flag on being a guy who swims in these waters a little bit already.
Hey, be careful with that, though. I don't want any fights. I saw, planting flags over the weekend caused some big issues in college football, and we want to avoid that.
Every Michigan guy got everything he had coming to them. I had no dog in that fight. You try and do something like that, get hit in the mouth, that's on you. Moving on. Do you want me to do you have one in mind? Do you want me to read what I have from the people on social media? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, let's go through the list that we got.
Okay. Tyler O'Neill was one I used as an example, just a random corner outfielder that nobody seems to be talking about. That was one. LA fan suggested Brendan Rodgers potentially. This was both my favorite and least favorite, Jurickson Profar. Favorite just because it made me laugh. Like, can you imagine Jurickson Profar as a Dodger? Carlos Correa, which I want to come back to because that one's been mentioned a bunch. I thought this was really interesting. Somebody suggested the Dodgers potentially trading for a guy like Luis Castillo from the Mariners or Sonny Gray. Both of those guys a little bit older pitchers, but if the Dodgers are wanting to get into sort of reinforcing that, there's a couple guys that are a little more up there. Nico Horner was suggested by Jordan Takimoto. Anthony Santander, a guy that's sort of in the Teoscar Hernandez mold. A Trevor Story trade, that was from Kiwi Dodger fan. That one was interesting to me if you think Trevor Story can play shortstop with the Red Sox eating a lot of his money. Kyle Finnegan coming over as a reliever, that was from Ella. Another vote for Arenado and Helsley, depending on if you thought that was in the middle category or the final category. And the last one, I thought this was interesting. Ismail suggested this one. Gavin Lux and Chris Taylor traded to, quote, someone in the NL Central for basically a package of players not on the 40-man roster. So essentially what they did with Michael Busch, do that with Gavin Lux, package Chris Taylor's contract, and then free up some 40-man roster spots by going and getting some prospects, which I thought was just a really fascinating, like that wouldn't shock me. I would be surprised because I think Gavin Lux is way more valuable to them now than Michael Busch was a year ago, but they've done that before. So that's a longer list, and we can get into a couple of these, but I'm curious just what catches your eye as I read through that.
A Lux and Taylor trade would be interesting for non-40-man guys. The reason I think Taylor, yes, like I felt like he was kind of a trade, I won't say candidate. That's what I was going to say, trade target, but a trade candidate before the Tommy Edman extension, just sort of looking at who the Dodgers had on the roster, kind of his role in the money and stuff and his struggles. But I mean, I think the problem is if you trade Gavin Lux, then at that point you're having to spend again to fill like either shortstop or second base would be my assumption. And I don't know how much, like if the Dodgers, they've already spent on Blake Snell, they're going to with either Juan Soto or Teoscar Hernandez, potentially on another starting pitcher, like you said, whether it's Walker Buehler, whether it's, maybe Jack Flaherty's market doesn't fully develop, but like those guys aren't coming back on like $5 million deals, right?
Yep,
So
no.
that is going to be money there too. And so, yes, like then you want to add in second base that or shortstop that you have to then, financially fill as well. Like I'm not sure that they would do that. The Tyler O'Neill thing is interesting to me. I think that I don't see that necessarily happening. Like I think that would be if, kind of worst case scenario for the Dodgers where Juan Soto signs elsewhere, Teoscar Hernandez for whatever reason, gets a bigger offer maybe and says, "Hey, I need to take this rather than come back." Then I think the Dodgers are really searching. I mean, do we just jump right into the Carlos Correa one?
Let me talk Chris Taylor real quick, because I did some digging on Chris Taylor and I found some of this stuff to be interesting. And so if we're talking about potentially trading Chris Taylor, here's a few notes that I kind of just dug in, right? So Chris Taylor signed a 4-year, $60 million contract heading into age 31. He has a club option for the 5th year and a $4 million buyout. So he's in year 4. So next year as a club option, they have to pay him either $13 million for the year or $4 million to buy him out. So just when it comes to trading him, keep in mind, he's making the amount of money, like the amount of money he's owed. He also has a trade bonus. So he would be owed an additional $2 million if he's traded, plus another $1 million. So it's $2 million if you're traded no matter what. And then he had different dates. So he gets $1 million if he's traded before the 2026 season. That was like a $3 million number a couple years ago. So basically in the next 12 months, between all the money that he's owed, he's owed something like $20 million. Chris Taylor is, if the option is declined, he would be owed $20 million between trade bonuses, a buyout, and then just the like $13 million, I think is what he's making kind of per year because of a signing bonus, whatever. So it's like $20 million is what's owed. So just keep that in mind, that like the $15 million AAV would actually cost $20 million, whether the Dodgers paying that or whatever. So I think that just tells you that it's going to be difficult to trade Chris Taylor. And yes, maybe the Dodgers would pay some of that, but like if the Dodgers paid half of it, are there teams out there that would even value Chris Taylor at $10 million a year? Would they value Chris Taylor at $8 million a year? And then the Dodgers are having to pay 12. So I don't think it's impossible. Maybe they're packaging him with a prospect or a reliever or something like that. I've talked about Michael Grove, who's somebody I really like, but I could see a world where Michael Grove gets traded. Maybe Michael Grove and Chris Taylor are packaged, and Grove is of value as a relief pitcher for a team that maybe has slightly lower standards than the Dodgers and believes in some of the upside that clearly the Dodgers believe in. Like I could see a package, but all that's to say, I think trading Chris Taylor would be harder than even maybe people who already think it's going to be hard. It would be harder than that. Let's talk Carlos Correa. 0% chance. Like I'm not interested. There's no percent chance of me that likes him. I'm not going to name names. There's somebody on one of our shows who has historically been. I'm not sure if this person remains a Carlos Correa guy, but was in favor of signing Carlos Correa over the last few years. But he's cooked and he's Carlos Correa, so that's a bad combo.
Yeah, the undercover.
Who is that person in the chat?
Yeah, might have just revealed themselves in our chat. Yeah, I mean, I'm not big on Correa. That being said, I do think that the limited number of players remaining from that 2017 team make it more likely now than it was back when he was a free agent, when there was still a few more of those guys around. So like back then I thought like there's no way the Dodgers do this just for clubhouse purposes. Now I'm not as sure, especially like shortstop is obviously a clear position of need. And so from a baseball standpoint, like it could make sense. And I think it's easier to sell to the clubhouse at this point than it was, like I said, back then. All that being said, on a personal level, I would much rather just stay away from that entirely.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just don't understand. I think the Dodgers, the beauty of the Tommy Edman contract, which we're going to talk about sort of the specifics in a little bit, the beauty of the Tommy Edman contract is it just doesn't make them desperate for a shortstop to the point that you would go out and again, tongue firmly planted in cheek when I said that Carlos Correa is cooked. Okay, like his value as a baseball player, sure. I'm still not interested in any of that kind of a thing. I don't think they're desperate enough to like, oh crap, we desperately need a shortstop, and Correa is the guy that's like, I think they've given themselves the optionality, and I just don't see Carlos Correa fitting into that. Would be my answer. So of these other ones, I mean, there's random shortstops that they could trade for. What do you think about the idea of going out and trading for a non-Garrett Crochet pitcher? Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray were the two mentioned. I'll throw this out. So Sonny Gray has 2 years and $60 million remaining on his deal, with a $30 million club option, a $5 million buyout going into his age 35 season. Castillo, to me, is the more interesting guy. He's a guy that we've talked about with the Dodgers, it feels like, for 4 years. He's very, very good. He has 3 years and $73.5 million left, a 4th year that vests if he throws 180 innings, which won't happen. So he has a no trade clause, worth pointing out, but 3 years, less than $25 million a year for Luis Castillo. That's a lot of money, right? We're talking about the Dodgers taking on more money, but at the same time, I could see a world where maybe that's a Gavin Lux destination. You've got a Mariners team that is just like desperate for offense in any way, shape, or form. And yes, Gavin Lux isn't solving all your offensive issues, but if you've got a bunch of pitchers in Seattle and you're trying to get the lineup a little more stacked, maybe there's a fit for like a Gavin Lux type paired with a James Outman type, or paired with a couple of these other pieces to maybe augment some of that. I'm curious what you think about that.
On the surface, I'd be more interested in a Luis Castillo trade. I think the wrinkle to both of these scenarios, in which, like, as much as we can kind of kick around the possibilities, ultimately we don't know, and specifically with what the Dodgers would be able to convince whether the Mariners or Sonny Gray still with the Cardinals, right? That's who gave him.
Yes,
or the Cardinals. Like, if they take on some of the salary, like, that changes things, right? Like, if the Cardinals say, okay, like, yes, we'll eat some of Gray's remaining salary, like, then it potentially becomes a little bit more attractive for whatever reason, even though, he might be older and have some other concerns. But yeah, just kind of surface level, my first like phone call, if you will, would be for Luis Castillo.
All right. Jonathan with the super chat here. He said, have we lost our built not bought rep? If Gavin Lux goes, we have no homegrown talent on the 26 man except for Smith and random depth pieces like Austin Barnes. This has been a conversation that I know we've got people that we've disagreed on our show amongst this, the Dodgers development of hitters. Obviously, a lot of the guys they've developed have ended up being traded for players that have come in. I think about a Michael Busch who had a really good season last year for the Chicago Cubs. He just didn't do it as a Dodger. So what do you think? Like, have the Dodgers lost their built not bought rep?
Not entirely. I mean, look, Walker Buehler just, like, I don't want to say he won them the World Series, but he played a pretty key part, and he's somebody he's a homegrown talent. Yeah. Andy Pajes, I know that come the playoffs, his starts, tapered off, but he made his MLB debut, and he was, signed as an international free agent. So he was brought up through the farm system. I mean, a bunch of guys also made their MLB debuts this year, out of circumstance, certainly in some cases. Bobby Miller, like, it had things gone his way, he's somebody who would have been a key contributor this year, and he's another of their draft picks. So has it fully gone away? I think, yes, if you trade Gavin Lux and you keep signing players here and there, that it does become a little bit more of, kind of, I guess, bought, not built. I would push, like, who cares is my, short of like the financial implications, right? And the penalties that they've now implemented, where if you keep exceeding the luxury tax threshold by X amount, 2, 3, 4 years in a row, then it does like eventually catch up to you. And I recognize that. But short of that stuff, like, I don't really care if the Dodgers sign players who become their stars and lead them to a World Series, or if they draft guys and they become the stars and lead them to, like, that makes no difference to me. It is a little bit, I guess, cooler, a nicer story if it is, the drafted guys. But I would say, like, a lot of times if you want that with teams, like, those teams, maybe are, unless it's 1 or 2 at a time, but you're not going to get like a core of, draft players who were drafted come up and all of a sudden lead you to a World Series, in my opinion, unless you're sort of rebuilding at some point, which I don't think anybody wants the Dodgers to really do. I think if the Dodgers, though, do position themselves as, hey, like, we do build instead of buying, like, it could be a little disingenuous, because yes, like, one criticism that I have had of the team is, fine, they draft these Corey Seagers, the Cody Ballingers. I know that, like, in certain cases it sort of makes sense, but they draft a lot of these guys, they develop them, they become stars, and then they leave. And I think like that sort of goes against like the point, like what's the point of drafting them, just to kind of groom them for other teams? And I know that the two examples I gave aren't the best because those were, I think, somewhat unique situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just, who cares?
I think two things. One is let's separate pitching and hitting, because pitching, I don't think there's an argument to be made that the Dodgers are not building this thing from the ground up within. And again, obviously a lot of the names you've mentioned, Gavin Stone, Landon Knack, Ben Kasperius, these are all guys that contributed and came up through the system. I think some people in the chat ask an interesting question, like who gets credit for Max Muncy? Like Max Muncy wasn't
true.
Like he wasn't any good when he showed up. Chris Taylor wasn't any good when they showed up. So if somebody says they still don't count because they didn't come up through the minor leagues, like maybe, but I mean, again, like I would argue if we're talking about built versus bought, and we're not just talking about drafted and developed, then Max Muncy, Chris Taylor would be guys that the Dodgers should get credit for. And there's a bunch of pitchers that I would put in the same category. And I think that the point that Scott and Blake and a bunch of people have made on this, like, I don't think they're off. I think it's a fair question to ask. I think one thing I've tried to suggest is it's a lot harder to draft, develop all-stars than maybe we give credit to. So when people look at the Dodgers roster and say, well, it's only Will Smith and it's only Andy Pages and it's only, Austin Barnes or whoever else, Gavin Lux, that might feel like oh man, it's only these guys. But I think like there's a lot of teams out there that haven't had that much success at drafting and developing guys like the four guys I just mentioned, especially if you add in all of the players that have then been traded away, like the Michael Busch of the world, who have gone on to be successful somewhere else. And so I think if you add all that together, you could maybe say the Dodgers are not currently as successful as they were in the Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager years, but I still think they're pretty darn successful compared to the rest of the league when you factor in the guys that they bring in and then develop at the AAA or major league level, even if they haven't been drafted necessarily.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is, the reality is the Dodgers, their first draft pick more times than not is not very high.
Yeah.
And so that complicates it too. Like you drafting late in the first round. If you do have a first round, like there have been times where they don't because of different penalties from players they either signed or went over luxury tax and all that. It does change the equation. It makes it harder than if you're, drafting number one and you can take Paul Skeens, right? Like that, not that he falls into your laps, but that's a no-brainer. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that question is a little overblown ultimately. Like if the Dodgers kind of continue along this current trajectory of roster construction and win 2, 3, 4 more World Series in the next 10 to 15 years, 20 years, like who cares? Like people like what, like, okay, fine. Like, oh, you guys, like the Dodgers paid, hundreds of millions to players. Look at that. Like, why are they doing that? Well, they're winning World Series. And ultimately that's what you get remembered for in this sport.
Totally. And I'd also add there's guys that have come up through the Dodger system and been traded away and maybe failed. And whether they would have failed as Dodgers, who knows? Maybe the Dodgers traded away a guy like Jeter Downs because they knew he was going to be a fraud, or maybe he would have had a better chance of success as a Dodger. Somebody in the chat asking an important question, Matt. As somebody who grew up in Los Angeles, moved to Oregon, and has since built myself a life that I'm pleased with, do I count for the Los Angeles area? Do I count as built or bought later on?
I think you're built.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So these guys that go away, and still survive, I think we count them in the built category, even if it ends up somewhere else. No. Let's do this. Let's shift gears a little bit and have a conversation about two of the contracts that the Dodgers have recently signed. Some details have come out in the past few days about both the Blake Snell contract and the Tommy Edman contract, signing bonuses, deferred money, all of that. So let's just get into that really quick. Tommy Edman, $17 million signing bonus, a $24.2 million deferred number, as well as a club option for the 2030 season. So he was under contract for next year. That contract was ripped up, basically, to use Jeff Passan's language, and it was replaced with a 5-year contract that has a 6th-year team option. Again, he gets $17 million up front, $24.2 million deferred. That 2030 season 6 is a $13 million club option with a $3 million buyout. Those are the numbers we have on Tommy Edman. I want to ask you a question that I hope does not get framed the wrong way, because I'm a positive person. I'm an optimistic person. What would you say, Matt, to somebody who looks at the Tommy Edman contract, a 5-year deal for a guy heading into his age 30 season, and then looks at a conversation that's being had around the Dodgers land about Chris Taylor, who signed a 4-year deal going into his age 31 season, and how we are now talking about Chris Taylor's deal heading into both years 3 and 4? I'm curious how you would respond to someone that is concerned about the Edman contract because of the reality they are currently living in with Chris Taylor.
I would say I understand that. Ultimately, I think the Dodgers will find a way to manage it the way they have. If Tommy Edman is somewhat of a repeat scenario of Chris Taylor, I mean, it's not ideal, obviously, but look, yes, there are. I'm not trying to like play the fence here. There are certain contracts that are better than others, like risk.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like we've seen all-stars in their prime get contracts that made sense or that were deemed not, I don't want to say worth it, but like that you understood why the player was getting
at the time.
Yes. And things go wrong right away. And maybe on the back end, like it somehow ends up evening out. And every scenario is different. You don't necessarily know. I think ultimately, you could you do the best that you can. And I think the front office I was critical of them last year, especially at the trade deadline and some of the decision making then. But for the most part, like they have more than earned the benefit of the doubt at this point under Andrew Friedman. So, you just kind of take it as it comes. You hope that Tommy Edman doesn't fall into the same path as Chris Taylor unfortunately has. But if he does, look, the Dodgers just won a World Series with Chris Taylor on their roster. So they could probably do it again if Tommy Edman is slumping a little bit.
The reality is Chris Taylor is basically like the worst case scenario for the Chris Taylor contract when it was signed. I mean, I remember coming on our show and talking about that contract and loving it and thinking like, man, I'm surprised this is all that it costs to get him. And of course, Chris Taylor has dealt with injuries. I've seen some people saying like Chris Taylor's swing is also a lot more complicated. I think that's also true. And so to answer my own question, I would tell that person, worst case scenario, the contract ages like Chris Taylor's, which means you don't really like it the last 2 years, but you can live with it because there's still moments of value. And the reality is like the 50th percentile outcome here is that Tommy Edman is a solid player throughout the course of this contract who's adding value in a number of ways. And he's a lot more simple as a player. There's a lot less moving pieces that have to go right for Tommy Edman to be successful. And so when you look at the actual nuts and bolts, the $17 million signing bonus, again, $24 million deferred, and then the club option, it's still a great contract. Now let's talk Blake Snell. Some of the specifics have come out. A $52 million signing bonus. We've talked about this. He lives in a income tax-free state of Washington. So he's loving that $52 million check that's going to be coming through income tax-free. The $130 million remaining on that contract, according to SpotTrack, half of it will be deferred. So $65 million will be deferred. He'll be getting $13 million a year payments from the Dodgers for the 5 years of the contract, and then another $13 million a year in deferred payments. The estimated luxury tax, again, according to SpotTrack, is $32.5 million for the Dodgers. Great news. This contract, we know the number was bigger than expected, but with the deferred money, the $32.5 million deal, all of it works out to, I think, for the Dodgers, a favorable contract.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, we discussed the Frankie Montas signing and how that, value sort of was, the total value was more than we would have anticipated. We could end up in a scenario where Blake Snell's contract in some sense, like maybe not a full bargain, but like the Dodgers at least, broke even type thing. And not that that necessarily needs to happen or really matter. But yeah, I mean, it makes it, the starting pitching was also a clear area of, and not just starting pitching. Like the Dodgers didn't need a number 6, 7, and 8 guy, right? Where they could kind of wait and play the market. They needed this top end type talent. So to get ahead of it a little bit, to take care of it, check that off so that you could continue on with the rest of the offseason is important. And I mean, I think whether it was, 65 deferred or
65
deferred. Or 45, like whatever it is, like ultimately for me, like I'm looking at the kind of just the years and the total dollar, like you're fine with it. Like it nothing jumped off the paper, at least in my opinion, of, oh man, like they really overpaid to get this deal done.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And again, the AAV comes down, but you could make a case the best starting pitcher that was out there. I think everybody on our show basically made the case that he would have been our number one target. None of it was rocket science in projecting Blake Snell to the Dodgers. I think he was basically connected to the Dodgers by everybody. And yet kudos to Andrew Friedman for then getting it across the line and structuring it in a way that was appealing to Blake Snell and also appealing to the Dodgers. I do want to talk real quick about deferred money, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse. I know most Dodger fans are probably sick of this, but I do think this was interesting. Again, Spotrac, who's kind of the best on all these contracts and is well-sourced when it comes to them, puts out a lot of great information. They posted this on Twitter, and this is I'm kind of adding in the Tommy Edman numbers because this was tweeted by them prior to Tommy Edman, but they said since July of 2020, the Dodgers have signed up for $989 million in deferred money. Even if you take out Shohei Ohtani, who I think is an outlier, his like $680 million or whatever the number is that's deferred, the Dodgers still would have had $284 million in deferred money, even without Ohtani's deferred money. If you added up every other deferral attached to a current Major League Baseball contract, it adds up to $271.5 million. So again, take Ohtani's deferred money out of the conversation. The Dodgers, since July of 2020, have basically as much deferred money on their books as every other major league team currently has. Another note I thought was interesting. Will Smith, who is getting $50 million in deferrals as part of his contract, that's fifth among Dodgers. There are only 4 guys outside of Los Angeles who have 50 or more in deferred money. So what's my point in all this, Matt? On one hand, do the Dodgers defer money? Sorry, let me back up. Does everybody defer money? Yes. Is it fairly normal to have some level of deferrals in your contracts? Yes. Do the Dodgers do it a lot more than everybody else? Yes. Is that bad for baseball or illegal? Hell no. None of it is. But I do think it's okay as Dodgers fans to look at the numbers and say, oh man, even if Ohtani's contract is a unicorn. Okay, set it aside. Even still, the Dodgers have more deferred money since July of 2020 than every other team in baseball combined. And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, and I think another thing, too, we need to mention before we continue to fully dive into this is when you defer salary, you also need to start funding, basically showing you can fund and pay off those
I believe
debts
it's
or
2 years.
the money
Like
owed.
2 years. It's like 2 years after the contract is signed. Like every 2 years, the Dodgers need to put $68 million into an account for Shohei Ohtani or something like that.
Right. And for these other players as well,
Totally.
right? Like, so it's not, I know that, it's Twitter, and saying it's Twitter speaks for itself these days. It's good and bad. I enjoy it. There are also times on there where I see a lot of things that are just flat out incorrect and just ridiculous. And this is going to fall under the latter of, the Dodgers are just basically putting the bill on some other ownership group that maybe is going to inherit the team at some point, and they're going to have all this money that's going to be owed. Like, yes and no, because again, like we just said, the Dodgers need to show like pretty quickly on 2 years that they can fund these contracts and the money is going to be there. So they're not going to leave. They're not going to sell the team. I haven't any reports of them selling, but they're not going to potentially sell the team in 5 years or something. And that owner is going to walk in blind and say, oh, by the way, there's this huge Ohtani bill coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another thing that I think I want people to understand.
And can I add something real quick? Because that money, so like 2 years after they sign it, they need to start every year, like $68 million needs to go into an account. That account simply needs to be quote unquote liquid, basically meaning if the next day the Dodgers needed to pull all that money out as cash, it would have to be. But think about the Dodgers are owned by a team of financial advisors. So what they're doing is they're putting that money, they can put that money into like basically the stock market, to just use simple terms here, because that money is still technically liquid, but in their mind, they're earning money off of it. So that's kind of the calculus on their end. But I think the point you're making is a good one. I just want to point out, it just has to be liquid as of, 2 years later.
Yeah, there's that. There's the fact that sponsorship deals alone, like especially with Ohtani specifically, like we've discussed it shortly after the Dodgers signed Ohtani for like a month straight, maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks, once a week. We were getting press releases. Dodgers signed a sponsorship agreement with such and such company based out of Tokyo.
Totally.
Next week, Dodgers signed a new sponsorship agreement with a Japanese airline. There's going to be official, flights from LAX to Japan now. So, to your point, are the Dodgers more aggressive with deferring salary? Yes, that is a strategy that this front office under Andrew Friedman, under Guggenheim with Stan Kasten have found works best for them. And they get players that have agreed. Like, that's another thing too. Nobody's forcing these players to sign contracts with deferred salary.
Right.
Teoscar Hernandez, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, they all could have said, no, actually, I want other terms. And the dollar amounts would have changed. The Dodgers would have figured out and said, okay, fine. We're not going to defer, X amount on your contract. We'll do it this way. The Dodgers presented Teoscar Hernandez with multiple options.
Yep.
One of, here's all the money you can get up front. Here's another, offer where if you want to defer some salary and what that will look like. Nobody is telling. So I was counting my thoughts. I apologize for the awkward pause there. So that's how the Dodgers choose to operate and do their business. And as you said, it is within the CBA guidelines and rules. Like, all these ridiculous tweets saying MLB needs to investigate the Dodgers for this. Like, get out of here. MLB needs to go investigate the Athletics, the Pirates, the Reds, all these teams for not like, why aren't fans upset at those owners saying, hey, like, at least spend, $150 million on your payroll. Like, it's not all about keeping salaries down so that you can pocket the money and continue to profit.
Yeah.
So I don't want to see, again, the Dodgers are operating within the rules and the guidelines. So let them be. If they're choosing to defer money and it's working, and again, players are agreeing to it, fine. It's a two-way street. By that same token, like, should the Dodgers front office and some of their fans on Twitter go to some of the teams I just mentioned and say, hey, you guys need to start spending more. Like, what's your problem? Like, why are you only paying, a $1 million to such and such player for a year? Like, what's your deal? Like, no, just everybody's operating how they choose, how they see fit for their organization within the rules.
And here's the last thing I'll say. Think about Blake Snell. So somebody was asking, like, when the money gets paid, the $68 million gets paid to Ohtani a decade from now, does that count against the salary cap of 2034? No. The way that the salary cap, the luxury tax, is calculated is net present value. So they look at how long the money is being paid out over, how much money is present day, how much money is 10 years, 20 years from now. They have some equation that says the net present value of Shohei Ohtani's contract is $43.5 million a year or something like that. So for Blake Snell, I mentioned combining the huge $52 million signing bonus that he gets today compared with the $65 million that will be deferred after he leaves the Dodgers. They calculate the net present value on an annual basis of his contract to be $32.5 million. Okay. So let's just play this out. If you're Blake Snell and the Dodgers come to you and net present value is calculated using numbers that you can trust. If they said, hey, Blake, we'll give you 5 years, $32.5 million, which is the net present value right now. So you'll get 5 years, $160 million. Or you can defer 5 years, and over the course of however long, 10 years, you'll get $182.5 million, right? Now, some people would look at that and say, give me all the money now. I'll invest it. I'll make more money back. And that's the smarter thing. Sure, you're in your right to think that. But clearly a guy like Blake Snell and a bunch of these players have decided, I kind of like the idea of making an extra $22.5 million with zero risk. There's no investment that I have to track. It's guaranteed to be $22.5 million more. Those are the decisions that these guys are kind of making. And Ohtani brought his idea to the Dodgers, so that's a separate category. But as Fabian Ardaya pointed out, they go to each of these guys with a suite of options. Like, do you want a bunch of money up front and less money? Do you want it spread out, or do you want it deferred? And that's the way the Dodgers end up making these decisions. And so I do think that needs to be mentioned. And as others have pointed out, the Dodgers are not taking advantage of players in, say, the way a lot of these teams do with guys from different countries who sign big contracts when they're younger, and i.e. the Braves end up getting a huge advantage over quote unquote market value because they're preying on players who are desperate for the money in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, the Braves have done it time and time again, where they announce these contract extensions and everybody looks around like, what? Like, how did that just happen? How are they doing this? Why are the players agreeing to that? So there's that. Let's also, I mean, where was the outrage when the Padres decided to spend $700 million on, or close to maybe $1 billion if you want to include Manny Machado, on shortstops that are no longer playing the shortstop position? Yeah. Where's the outrage there, right? Like, nobody's getting upset at them spending on players that are then having to get moved around. So, it's frustrating. It is what it is. It's ridiculous. More than anything, like, I just wish there was an understanding. If you want to criticize the Dodgers for being more aggressive with deferrals, fine, go for it.
Yeah. You'd be right. You'd be right. I just laid it out. Yeah. The Dodgers have more in deferrals than all of other Major League Baseball combined.
Right. But if you want to create this narrative that the Dodgers are the only team doing it, the Dodgers are breaking rules, that's just ignorant to me. And that's where the frustration comes from.
Amen. Amen. All right, let's shift gears. Let's close this out with some questions. We got 10 or 15 minutes left to take some questions. If you've got any, go ahead and throw those in the chat. All caps questions, and we will get to as many of those as possible. You kind of hinted at this. We did a Thanksgiving update, but fettuccine you had during Thanksgiving, was there a wedge salad involved?
No, I didn't have a wedge salad, and I will happy to report for the masses that were very concerned about my dinner. After having some fettuccine, I did get a small plate of some turkey, I think I put mashed potatoes and gravy on it as well. So a little bit, I did have some of the quote unquote traditional Thanksgiving food that I know everybody was so concerned about.
There you go. There you go. I'm glad to hear that. I'm happy for you. And I do want to report, by the way, that I won on Twitter. There was a poll that I won. Blake will tell you about some YouTube poll that exists that may have had him in first place, but we don't have to pay much attention to that one on Twitter, where we all know there's only real numbers. It's only real truth. There's no robots involved at all. I just want people to know, Matt, that on Twitter, I won.
Yeah, that was interesting because I felt like when we were doing that show live, the comments, I was holding my own with a lot of people. So I'm going to count that as a win for me in some very scientific poll calculations as I was, scrolling through everything as we were doing that live. I know, yes, Blake mentioned the YouTube poll. What I have found is I don't trust polls unless I win. So if I win, then the polling and the numbers were great. If I lose, then something was off, and I think machines were hacked. So that's how I go about things.
Fair. GT88 says, just got here. Did you guys see the Murakami news that just dropped? He's a third baseman from Japan. He will be posted after 2025 is the news. He's a 24-year-old who's a stud over in Japan. So I'm not going to pretend to know a ton about Murakami, but the news that is being referred to here is that about an hour ago, it was announced that he agreed to a contract with his team for 2025 and then announced that this would be his last season there. So as expected, he will wait till after his age 25 season. He will not be subject to the Roki Sasaki international free agency posting. He will be posted in the same way that Yoshinobu Yamamoto is, which basically means he can get paid as much money as he possibly wants. So good news there. Let's get to some other questions. Iris wants to know, why did Jeff shave? So to be clear, for people that have been following, I had a beard. Most of the time I'm on here, I have a beard. I shaved all of it except for a mustache for a show. And it was hilarious because everybody's like, how did Jeff grow a mustache so quickly? And it was like the 12th comment that was like, I think he had a beard and he just shaved it. I like to mess with my wife is the answer. She actually likes the mustache. Doesn't make any sense to me, but that's a thing. And I wasn't going to stick around with a mustache for that long. So that's the shortest version of how I ended up with a mustache and why I no longer have one. So this is also why I normally have a beard, because I look like I'm 14 years old when I'm completely clean shaven. So hopefully I've answered all of your questions all at once. Let's see. Alleluia says, will the Dodgers be able to develop another JT Muncy Taylor type player in the next 10 years? It's interesting because on the pitching side, this train hasn't stopped. Evan Phillips belongs in this category. Anthony Bonda, depending on kind of what his career ends up looking like, could be another guy in this category. But do you think there's still room for the Dodgers to bring somebody over who's maybe fallen out of favor somewhere else and develop them, a la Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Chris Taylor?
I think it might. They might be hard pressed to do it at that high of a level. And I know, we just got done discussing Chris Taylor and his outlook and his future and some of his struggles, but they're like, even if you want to include kind of Chris Taylor's peak, him, Justin Turner, Max Muncy, the three that are referenced here, like that's like 100, and I'll use some computer numbers here to make Jeff very happy, like 110th percentile outcomes, right? Like Justin Turner became an all-star. All three of those guys became all-stars and contributors, everyday players on World Series contending teams, World Series winning team. So it's not something that, like, that's kind of hard to do again. I think it's possible that maybe they could find something similar where, they have a very good role player type thing and not necessarily some of the higher upside that we saw with those guys.
Brandon wants to know any news on the new Dodger dogs next year, Matt. Any? Do we have an update on if Dodger dogs are going to be good again?
I mean, were they ever good? Would be my
Well,
question.
come on.
No, I mean, I don't think there's any reason
With
to believe.
you don't do Farmer John like that, Matt. Don't do Farmer John like that. Okay.
I mean, they've tasted Farmer John and Papa Cantella's. They've tasted one and the same. So
No, my gosh, Matt, don't do this. Don't do this. Farmer John. I mean, Vince Scully used to narrate their commercials for that reason alone. Don't put any disrespect on Farmer John's name.
let's move on then. Nothing against Farmer John. It's nothing against Farmer John. It's just the Dodger dog specifically, I think, is just extremely overrated.
Okay. Dong wants to know, how does Jeff feel about the Ducks as the #1 team? Huskies were never close. Look, the Ducks basketball team won some tournament I'd never heard of, beat the #8 team in the country after the Duck football team beat the Huskies by 1 million. They're 12-0. We don't have to play Ohio State again. We get to play Penn State again. I mean, look, the Dodgers won the World Series. The Duck football team hasn't lost. The Duck men's basketball team hasn't lost. I got no complaints over here, Matt. Do you want a little corner to talk about USC football, or do you want to pass?
No, yeah, we could pass that.
If you could, I asked my buddy this. If you could bring back Clay Helton to replace Lincoln Riley tomorrow, would you do it?
No, because there still is like the ceiling of Lincoln Riley, which I would argue like Lincoln Riley's ceiling is lower than what of. And I've told you this was like the minute they hired him. Like I was like, great, okay, it is theoretically better than Clay Helton, but I don't think Lincoln Riley's as good as everybody is saying. I still do think his ceiling is higher than Clay Helton's. So there's at least the hopium that you can hang on to it. And I'm just wondering if Nick Saban is ready to come out of retirement yet.
Oh my gosh. You don't want what's Urban Meyer? No Urban Meyer interest?
A few years ago, yes. Not as much anymore.
Scooter asks, was the Correa thing actually legit that the Dodgers are looking in? I do hear that instance that a former MLB player says the Dodgers should look into him, but nothing more than that. Look, I would say if the report was, I would believe the report that the Dodgers checked in on Carlos Correa and what the cost might be, etc., because I think they probably do that with like 85% of the league. I would guess it's not that the Dodgers aren't like actively pursuing Carlos Correa and actually willing to pay something for him would be my guess.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it was just more of, the Dodgers check in with probably hundreds of players that sometimes we hear about. More times than not, we probably just don't hear about it.
Yeah. One fast Q says, is Roki still highly projected to go to the Dodgers? Sounds like depends on who you ask, Matt. I mean, when I just read the people that are out there, it feels like a lot of guessing, a lot of speculation, and there are still some people that think the Dodgers are heavy favorites.
Yeah, I think they are the favorite, but I still wouldn't be fully surprised if Roki ends up elsewhere, just because, like you said, we really just don't know.
Yeah. That's where I'm at. Larry asks, any way Teoscar signs somewhere else before Soto signs? So there's a belief that we've even talked about that the Dodgers are going to wait to see what Soto does before making a decision on Teoscar. We said one of the fears would be that the Dodgers might miss out on Teoscar Hernandez because another team who knows they're not swimming in the Soto market might come to him and say, here's the number, 48 hours, yes or no. Do you think there's any chance that happens?
Slim chance. I still think that whether it's the Dodgers or another team, it makes sense for Teoscar to hold out on Juan Soto, because if there are, 4 or 5 teams involved for Soto, there's going to be 3 or 4 who don't get him, who then probably are all going to turn their attention to Teoscar Hernandez. And he could say, well, this is now my new price. And he has, kind of his own bidding war.
Yeah. I just think there's not enough other players out there. So if a team was like, we can't pay for Soto, we're going to make this demand on Teoscar Hernandez. Teoscar Hernandez would look at them and say, and you're going to go sign who in 48 hours? Like, okay, maybe Anthony Santander is a guy that you like. And then what? Like there's 3 guys, Soto, Teoscar, and Santander. And other than them, there's about 10 teams that could use a corner outfield bat. And so I don't think any team's going to be able to back him into a corner that would preclude the Dodgers, would be my answer. Eddie wants to know, what will cost more this season, Dodger dogs or a soda? Any guesses at Dodger Stadium?
I think a soda. I think Dodger dogs are still reasonably priced, unless you get like the Brooklyn, like all beef one. That's where you end up paying kind of the premium. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the bigger question is going to be, are they going to start charging the press for Dodger Dogs in the press box, because those have historically been free. But maybe there's all this deferred salary that they're going to have to start funding and paying off. So maybe that'll change for the media folk.
Okay, there you go. You heard it there. And beer will still be $24. So there you go.
Yeah, that's easy.
GI wants to know, will Nick Frasso get a chance to make the rotation, or is he going to be the next Michael Busch traded away for young prospects? The thing Frasso has going for him is that he plays a position that is not blocked for the next decade, like Michael Busch. He also has a position. I guess he has that going for him compared to Michael Busch. So I don't think he'll get traded away for young prospects in the same way that Busch did, because I think it's very different motives. Nick Frasso was the top rated pitching prospect in the organization a year ago. He was ranked more highly than Gavin Stone was, than Landon Knack was, than Ben Kasparius was, a bunch of these guys that came up. And so, yes, the shoulder injury obviously hurt his stock and where he ranks, but I say that only to prove that a lot of people thought really highly of this guy a year ago. And there's no reason to believe that he'll never amount to anything simply because of one surgery. So I think he'll get a chance. I don't know where he falls in the pecking order. Like, does he jump back ahead of Kasparius now that he's healthy? Justin Robleski's another name. Like, is he in that mix? Is he in the Emmett Sheehan mix? Another guy coming off of injury? Is he closer to Bobby Miller, who had a bad year? I mean, that will be interesting at spring training, is kind of the guys that are healthy, figuring out where a guy like Nick Frasso fits in the mix.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I wouldn't fully be shocked if he's traded, but I think with a lot of the injury concerns with some of the younger pitchers that you just mentioned, that, the Dodgers aren't really in a position. Like, if as you cited, he was ranked higher than a lot of these younger guys. So, the Dodgers still going to kind of believe in that rather and maybe need it at some point.
Showtime LA says, Jeff, who would you rather have between Adames and Correa? Adames, and it's not close. Matt?
Yeah, Adames easily.
Correa is a non-starter for me, and you can talk all baseball stuff you want. I don't have a desire to ever root for Carlos Correa on my favorite team. Vivian wants to know any information on how to buy tickets for the Tokyo Dome series.
Not that we have heard from MLB or the Dodgers yet. So I imagine that maybe this month at some point. I know that for the Seoul series, it was restricted to citizens in South Korea. So I don't know if we'll see something. Actually, limited number of Padres season ticket holders, and I think maybe even some Dodgers season ticket holders had access to them. But yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's going to be. I think it'll be a similar format to that.
One Fast asked, do you guys play MLB The Show, Dodgers Blue Tournament? We do have some people that play the show. Blake and Scott play the show. I believe Daniel does a little bit. Is that right, Matt? Do you know?
Daniel and I played only when we were out at spring training because Blake had it.
Okay.
What Blake failed to disclose until after he basically was beating people was that the controller that I happened to use, the controller that Daniel happened to use, the controller that Scott happened to use was broken. Like, one of the buttons didn't work.
Yeah, it's classic.
And so that we'll have to see. Maybe we'll do we'll all pitch in as a staff to make sure we have a controller that has not been tampered with when we play Blake again.
Scott, by all accounts, is very, very good at the show, right? Like, he was trying to explain some ranking system that he was on, and he's really good, I think.
Yes, I don't have a full grasp of it, but he is, yes, he is very good. And so that's why, Scott got out there after Daniel, Blake, and myself did. And so Blake had beat me and Daniel. And so Scott walked in and we said, hey, we've heard that you play, you need to beat Blake. So he said, okay. And then he starts complaining the controller wasn't working. And Blake's like, oh yeah, it's just this and this. So yeah, they'll need to do some sort of rematch.
I love it. Okay, 2 questions. Robert asks, the intro. Are we changing the intro?
Yes, I know we're working on it. I apologize for how long it's taken. That 1, there's been a holiday. 2, we want to make sure that it is put together as nicely as possible. We want to get a great product for you guys. 3, if you've been on the Dodger Blue website, our sister site, Lakers Nation, if you know anybody who reads Angels Nation, you'll notice that in the past couple months, we have also changed over our templates to a new layout and stuff like that. So that has taken up a lot of our time, and then ironing out kind of some of the bugs behind the scenes. So our apologies for the intro still being a little outdated, but yes, we will work on it. Hopefully by the start of the new year, it'll be done, but definitely I would say by spring training.
Love it. I love it. Okay, last question. Hawaiian Kier asking the real ones. Chocolate chip cookies, question mark. Do you have a favorite kind with walnuts, white chocolate, macadamia nuts? Matt, your opinion on chocolate chip cookies and your favorite version of them.
So I do like chocolate chip cookies. I'm probably just going traditional, just regular chocolate chip. I'm not opposed to like adding walnuts.
Yeah.
I don't think. I do like a macadamia cookie. But I don't know if I would want them necessarily together, though. I think I would just keep them separate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm chocolate chip cookies are like I've said. Like I don't love a ton of sweets, but chocolate chip cookies is one of the sweet dessert items, if you will, that I will indulge in a little bit.
Yeah, I think just a classic chocolate chip cookie is by far the best cookie that you can have. I'm with you. I think if I had to add something, a little walnut would be nice. Someone saying some sea salt on top, sure. But I think chocolate. Oh,
I tried the sea salt thing, and I did not care for it at all. I thought it was strange.
Are you a crispy chocolate chip cookie or a soft chocolate chip cookie? Like, if we're not talking, neither is warm. Like, do you want a chewy one, like a sort of a soft one, or do you want crispy?
No, I want the softer one.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm not a big, the crispy stuff is a no-go for me. So
yeah,
there you go. Great question, Hawaiian Kira. Great question. Folks, that'll do it for us tonight here on Dodger Heads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. We appreciate you joining us. Over 2,500 people in here with us. Thank you. As a reminder, we are here every Sunday night. It'll be Matt and I. Every Tuesday night, Anthony and I. Every Thursday night, Blake and Scott, as well as content coming at you throughout the week in the mornings as well. So make sure if you have not subscribed and ring the notification bell. If you've got a Dodgers fan in your life that is not with us, either on live shows or watching, please send them a link, invite them to subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. We do have a podcast. If you're a podcast person, you can listen to these shows on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Just go ahead and find the Dodger Heads podcast, rate, review, subscribe. We would appreciate all of that. And of course, just check out DodgerBlue.com. People like Matt, Blake, Scott, writing up content on there, the latest news and notes. So it's great content as well. That is Matthew Moreno. I am Jeff Spiegel. Folks, enjoy the rest of your night. As always, go Dodgers. And yes, still champs.